Dear listeners, have you ever paused mid-sip of your morning coffee and contemplated, could this be your final taste? That haunting thought crossed my mind today, and countless mornings before. The coffee's fragrance permeated the kitchen, heavy and comforting like a gentle beckoning. As I brought the delicate porcelain to my mouth, allowing the silky brew to touch my palate, something felt off. The moment its rich bitterness spread across my tongue, I stopped dead. A cold tremor coursed through me as an unmistakable metallic flavor lingered, leaving my mouth numb with an icy sensation. My grip tightened on the cup's handle, attempting to control my shaking hands. This wasn't unfamiliar territory. It had happened before. Twice. Thrice. Perhaps more. The only certainty was that each occurrence left me feeling weakened, depleted, as if someone was systematically poisoning my system. Approaching footsteps snapped me from my thoughts. There stood Richard, my husband, in the kitchen doorway, one hand straightening his tie, the other adjusting his pristine collar. His appearance was flawless as always, each detail precisely arranged to perfection. Our gazes connected, and he offered a smile, too calculated, too flawless, too practiced. "Everything fine, Eleanor?" His tone was gentle, measured, as if testing my response. I paused momentarily. Was this genuine concern? Or was he monitoring my reactions? I managed a weak smile, tracing the edge of my coffee cup where steam still danced upward in thin spirals. Part of me wanted another sip, to confirm my suspicions. But wisdom prevailed. I wouldn't risk another taste. Perhaps I was mistaken. Maybe this was all in my head. Yet if my instincts were right, if these episodes of nausea, vertigo, and exhaustion weren't merely signs of aging or poor health, as Richard constantly suggested, if this was deliberate, someone wanted me dead. Another voice interrupted my dark musings. "Eleanor, you're looking rather wan. Should you lie down?" I glanced up to see Beatrice, my husband's sister, entering the kitchen. Her crimson silk dress perfectly accentuated her lean frame. Her golden locks fell elegantly around her shoulders, her makeup impeccable. But her eyes held a predatory gleam. Behind her polished smile, I detected a hint of satisfaction. Beatrice had always excelled at maintaining appearances. She positioned herself next to Richard, and the sight disturbed me. Something felt terribly amiss. Their chemistry was too perfect, too natural. Most would never suspect a refined socialite like Beatrice, or an accomplished businessman like Richard of harboring dark intentions. But I knew differently. I stared down at the coffee cup before me. The wisps of steam still rose gracefully, carrying an enticing aroma, but to my heightened senses, it represented nothing but a potential vessel of death. Drawing a measured breath, I forced my features into a semblance of normalcy. I couldn't afford to let my mask slip, couldn't allow them to glimpse my growing suspicions. Caution was paramount now. The truth lay somewhere in this web of deception. But before I could untangle it, one imperative remained. My survival hung in the balance. The first instance of that metallic taste remains etched in my memory with crystal clarity. It happened at Beatrice's lavish birthday celebration last year. She personally handed me a crystal glass of wine, and though the peculiar taste gave me pause, I dismissed it as my aging palate's sensitivity to alcohol. The following morning brought excruciating consequences. My head throbbed mercilessly, my stomach churned with such intensity that food became unthinkable. Richard maintained his vigil by my bedside, offering gentle reassurances, attributing my condition to simple food poisoning. "You must watch your alcohol intake, Eleanor. You're not as resilient as you once were." I accepted his explanation without question. Surely it was mere coincidence. But the pattern continued to unfold. Another evening at Beatrice's residence brought another suspicious drink, this time a carefully crafted cocktail. During a subsequent visit to her estate, Richard presented me with freshly squeezed orange juice, insisting it would revitalize me. Each incident left its mark. Inexplicable fatigue, spinning rooms, waves of nausea, persistent headaches that seemed eternal. Yet Richard consistently dismissed my concerns, attributing everything to overexertion and insufficient rest. I began observing more closely. Beatrice's gaze would linger unnaturally whenever she served me drinks, studying my reactions. When I voiced health complaints, her lips would twitch almost imperceptibly, a knowing expression that suggested hidden motives. The possibility of surveillance became a constant worry. When I finally confided in Sarah, her reaction was explosive. "Eleanor, do you hear yourself? Are you suggesting that Beatrice and Richard could be deliberately poisoning you?" Her words trailed into silence, the mere suggestion too outlandish to voice completely. Initially, I shared her disbelief. The thought seemed preposterous. 3 decades of marriage to Richard had weathered countless storms. How could my life partner harbor such sinister intentions? Yet the evidence was becoming impossible to dismiss. Sarah's expression grew grave as she leaned forward. "Eleanor, you must exercise extreme caution. If your instincts are correct, don't delay action until it's too late." That night, sleep eluded me completely. For the first time since my suspicions began, I found myself diving into the digital realm, meticulously researching symptoms of gradual poisoning. What I discovered sent me spiraling down a horrifying path of medical articles and documented cases. The stories were chilling. Victims who had endured months of poisoning, oblivious to their fate until their bodies had deteriorated beyond recovery. My investigation led me to Reddit, where personal narratives sent shivers down my spine. One post particularly resonated with my situation. "I suspect someone is poisoning me, but I lack concrete evidence. What steps should I take?" The comment section overflowed with suggestions, from testing beverages for toxic substances to installing surveillance cameras. I absorbed every detail, feeling as though I had crossed into an alternate reality, where paranoia wasn't unfounded, but a terrifying truth. With each passing moment, my blind trust in Richard seemed increasingly foolish. Small incidents I had previously overlooked now surfaced with alarming clarity. The mysterious messages glimpsed on his mobile device. Those unexplained business travels, conspicuously lacking documentation for accommodations or flights. The secretive conversations between him and Beatrice that would cease abruptly upon my entrance. I had convinced myself I was overthinking, influenced by too many mystery novels. But denial was no longer an option. One September afternoon, I decided to validate my suspicions. When Richard presented me with my usual evening green tea, I executed my plan. Instead of consuming it, I discreetly transferred the liquid to a concealed vial and submitted it to an independent laboratory. I knew better than to inform Richard about any health investigations. He would undoubtedly find ways to conceal evidence. The results arrived 3 days later. The tea sample contained traces of thallium. I remained paralyzed in my vehicle for over 60 minutes, the laboratory report resting ominously beside me. My extremities felt frozen, my heart thundering against my chest wall. The evidence was irrefutable. Someone had orchestrated my demise, and time was running out to identify the perpetrator. I remained motionless, fixated on the test results beside me. Thallium, a lethal substance, invisible, scentless, flavorless, a poison notorious in criminal cases I'd encountered in detective novels. But this wasn't fiction anymore. It was present in my beverage. A shudder coursed through me as I contemplated the tea's preparer, Richard. Self-deception was no longer possible. Speculation had ended. No more maybes. Someone was orchestrating my murder. Yet one crucial question remained. Why? The truth needed uncovering. The following day, I initiated my plan. While maintaining an appearance of normalcy, I knew surveillance of Richard and Beatrice was crucial. My survival depended on exposing their hidden agenda. I strategically positioned a compact surveillance camera in the living room, concealing it within the bookshelf's corner. Another miniature recording device found its place in Richard's office. Having crafted narratives about resourceful, astute women in my novels, it was time to embody those qualities myself. The wait proved brief. Several days later, after Richard's departure, I reviewed the recordings. My fingers quivered as I accessed the video file. The scene that unfolded made my pulse race. Richard and Beatrice occupied the living room, their proximity unmistakably intimate. I fine-tuned the audio, struggling to capture their exchange. The plan must proceed flawlessly, Richard. Beatrice's voice. Honeyed, yet razor-edged. You think I'm not aware? Richard responded, his tone hushed, laced with anxiety. Has she shown any signs of suspicion? I remained motionless. They were discussing me. Eleanor still believes in me. Rest assured. I nearly scoffed. Believe in him? Believe in him? Had they truly deemed me so naive? I continued observing, my grasp intensifying on the desk's edge. Richard bent to kiss Beatrice's hand. She responded with a delicate laugh, murmuring something inaudible into his ear. But I needed no translation. That subtle gesture revealed everything. Richard and Beatrice were lovers. Both had violated my trust. Rage simmered within me, but I maintained composure. Not now. Additional proof was essential. I needed to grasp the complete narrative. I engaged Michael Harris, a former detective still accepting private cases. Upon presenting him with the laboratory results and surveillance footage, he contemplated silently before addressing me. Mrs. Vance, are you cognizant of what you're confronting? My fists tightened. How could I not be? I whispered. He acknowledged with a nod. I'll pursue this. But exercise caution. If your intuition proves correct, this transcends mere infidelity. I comprehended perfectly. This was a plot. Departing Michael's office, my thoughts churned. I'd steeled myself for Richard's potential unfaithfulness, but the calculated nature blindsided me. He desired my death. At home, I scrutinized our financial documents. The withdrawals from our shared accounts came as no shock. Richard had channeled hundreds of thousands of dollars into an undisclosed account, one I'd never discovered. He'd been orchestrating his escape, a future excluding me. I closed my eyes, drawing a measured breath. They presumed me powerless. They assumed I would remain passive. But they were gravely mistaken. I confronted my reflection in the mirror, examining the woman staring back at me. The trepidation that once clouded my gaze had vanished. Fleeing was no longer an option. I would ensure they faced the consequences of their actions. For 3 decades, I believed I understood the man who shared my bed. I had dismissed Beatrice as merely an envious woman, not recognizing her as the architect of a malevolent plot. Now, clarity had replaced uncertainty. They sought my demise, and I refused to become their prey. A direct confrontation without meticulous preparation would be foolish. One wrong move would paint me as the delusional antagonist. I methodically expanded my surveillance network, placing cameras in Richard's office, throughout the living space, and within our bedroom. The antique timepiece on the bookshelf, an item Richard consistently overlooked, became home to a discreet recording device. I began scrutinizing his financial activities, investigating his communications, his digital footprint, gathering every piece of available intelligence. The revelations exceeded my darkest suspicions. Richard and Beatrice's relationship transcended mere infidelity. They had orchestrated an elaborate scheme to transfer my entire estate into Richard's possession. Hidden within his safe, I discovered a fabricated will, stipulating that upon my unexpected departure, my entire fortune would pass to my beloved spouse. My death would secure their financial future. I confided in Sarah, my most trusted confidant. As I revealed the truth, the color drained from her face. Eleanor, this is madness. You must alert the authorities. I dismissed her suggestion. The evidence is insufficient. Law enforcement requires more than questionable transactions and ambiguous recordings. You understand legal requirements, Sarah. I need a strategy. Sarah's eyes darkened with worry. What's your next move? My jaw tightened as I clenched my fists. Role reversal. They want me as their victim? Instead, I'll become the predator. I maintained a facade of ignorance, accepting Richard's coffee, attending Beatrice's social functions. While appearing to consume their offerings, I discreetly disposed of them. Let them believe their scheme progressed smoothly. Then I orchestrated my countermove. I reconnected with a former associate, Mark Harris, an accomplished lawyer who had assisted with my literary contracts. After sharing my discoveries, I enlisted his help in revising my legal will, ensuring my entire estate would benefit charitable causes upon my death, leaving Richard empty-handed. I emailed myself the updated will and strategically placed a manufactured confession in my personal safe, where Richard would inevitably discover it. The letter concluded with a simple statement. If I die, Richard, you won't get a single cent. Consider your next move carefully. Several days later, I attended Beatrice's intimate soiree, an exclusive gathering reserved for her inner circle. I selected a crimson silk gown, matching the shade she had worn the evening my suspicions first took root. Making my way to the kitchen, I found Richard methodically pouring wine. Would you care for coffee, Eleanor? He inquired, his tone deceptively gentle. I gazed at the steaming cup before me. Indeed. I offered a measured smile. But perhaps you'll join me this time? Richard faltered. A momentary hesitation, but I caught it. He composed himself, forcing a smile. Certainly. I lifted both cups, extending one to him. My eyes never left his face. I observed. Richard met my gaze. Then his eyes dropped to the coffee, and he refused to drink. I had my confirmation. I departed earlier than anticipated, but home wasn't my destination. I proceeded directly to Mark's legal office, where Sarah awaited. Is everything in place? Sarah questioned. I confirmed with a nod. Yes. Now we await their response. Upon returning home the following day, I discovered my safe had been breached. The planted letter vanished. On Richard's desk lay an unsigned divorce agreement. My message had been received. Richard and Beatrice had plotted my demise to seize my fortune. Now they understood that my death would yield them nothing. Their options were limited: proceed with their scheme and risk exposure, or vanish. I had transformed from prey to predator. The dynamics had shifted. Beatrice's gathering unfolded precisely according to plan. Crystal chandeliers cast a luminous glow across the room, while laughter resonated through the grand space. Elegantly dressed guests sipped cocktails, engaging in superficial discussions about investments, property, and exotic travels. I remained focused on my purpose. I awaited a specific moment. Richard and Beatrice, the conspirators, stood within view, portraying the perfect couple to society. But this evening, I was more than the deceived spouse. Tonight, I held the power. I raised my champagne glass but barely tasted it. Mental clarity was essential. They had monitored my every move, anticipating weakness. Yet they remained oblivious. I had been conducting my own surveillance, and tonight, their deception would be exposed. I made my way toward the bar where Beatrice stood, adorned in a scarlet silk gown, exuding an air of superiority. As I drew near, she pivoted to face me, her lips curving into a calculated smile. Eleanor, you're looking quite presentable. Her words dripped with false sweetness, while her eyes betrayed cold calculation. I placed my champagne on the bar's polished surface, returning her smile. How kind. You're stunning as always, Beatrice. She cocked her head, seemingly pleased. Naturally. Tonight is quite special. I released a gentle chuckle. Indeed it was. Though not as she imagined. At that moment, Richard appeared, placing his hand possessively on Beatrice's waist in what he believed was an inconspicuous gesture. But I noticed it. I noticed everything. I observed them a moment longer than comfortable, just enough to make them sense something wasn't quite right. Richard, I said, my voice ethereal. I've prepared a small surprise. His expression clouded with confusion. A surprise? Yes. Given tonight's significance, I thought we should share something meaningful. I raised my hand and a server appeared promptly, setting down 2 steaming coffee cups before us. I captured Richard's gaze. Surely you wouldn't deny your wife a drink. His breathing quickened. For just a moment, I caught it. That flash of fear in his eyes. Then came the glance. A swift, almost imperceptible look at Beatrice. They understood. They realized the coffee before them might contain the very poison they had once intended for me. With deliberate grace, I raised my cup. Richard's remained untouched. Is something wrong? I inquired softly. Won't you join me? The atmosphere grew tense. Other guests began to take notice. Richard's throat worked visibly. Beatrice broke the mounting tension. Eleanor, are you well? Her attempt at composure couldn't mask the underlying strain in her voice. Never better. I set my cup down and fixed them with a penetrating stare, truly studied them. But I have something to share with everyone. I retrieved my phone from my clutch. Then I hit play. Through the elegant glow of the crystal chandelier, Richard and Beatrice's voices resonated. Everything must go perfectly, Richard. Don't you think I realize that? Are you certain she hasn't caught on? Their recorded conversation shattered the evening's facade. A wave of shocked murmurs swept through the gathering. Guests exchanged startled looks. Some turned accusingly toward Richard. Others stood frozen in disbelief. Richard stood paralyzed, the color draining from his face like water from a broken vessel. Beatrice's eyes grew wide before she whirled toward me, her composure shattering. Eleanor, what sort of sick game are you playing? A game? I arched an eyebrow. Is that your interpretation? Perhaps you'd care to explain this segment? I touched the screen once more. Once this scheme succeeds, we'll possess everything she owns. Stillness descended. That instant marked their realization that defeat was absolute. Richard's hands balled into fists. You orchestrated this, he snarled. I held his gaze, unwavering. You orchestrated your own downfall. Beatrice retreated, her eyes frantically scanning the exits, seeking escape. But before she could act, the main doors flew open. 2 police officers entered with purposeful strides. Richard Vance, Beatrice Thorne. You're under arrest for conspiracy to poison Eleanor Vance, will forgery, and attempted theft of assets. Chaos exploded. I observed as Richard rounded on Beatrice, his features twisted in fury. What's happening here? He roared. Beatrice blanched. I'm clueless. I don't understand how she... I remained motionless, watching the 2 conspirators who had plotted my destruction being led away in handcuffs. As the doors closed behind them, I exhaled deeply. I faced the astonished gathering. Please, everyone, continue enjoying the celebration. I raised my champagne glass with a smile. I have a new manuscript to craft. And this one wouldn't be fictional. It would chronicle my survival story. Stillness. That was my initial sensation after everything settled. Gone were Richard's calculating glares. Gone were Beatrice's insincere smiles. Gone was the dread that accompanied each coffee sip or moment alone in that vast empty mansion. Just me and my newfound liberation. Richard and Beatrice's arrest at the party marked their downfall. The evidence I'd collected provided the police with an unassailable case. Their plot had crumbled. Yet my narrative continued. 14 days post-arrest, I entered the courthouse for the initial hearing. Richard occupied the defendant's seat, his formerly assured presence now fractured. Beatrice appeared even more diminished, her once piercing gaze now clouded with dread. Their power had evaporated. My attorney presented the complete evidence: recorded conversations, surveillance videos, laboratory confirmation of thallium poisoning, even Richard's meticulously forged will. When given a chance to speak, Richard emitted a hollow laugh. "She was always suspicious," he muttered. "We never meant to end anyone's life. The plan was just to teach her to know her place." I met his stare unflinchingly. "Did you expect me to surrender?" My tone remained steady. "Did you think I would vanish into thin air, Richard?" He offered no response. The judge handed down Richard's sentence: 15 years behind bars for attempted murder conspiracy and financial deception. Beatrice was given 10 years for her role as a co-conspirator. As the judgment echoed through the courtroom, I closed my eyes and drew in a deep breath. Victory was mine. I made my way back to my residence, the grand house that had once harbored deception and treachery. Entering the master bedroom, I surveyed the space. The wedding portraits of Richard and me had vanished. The king-sized bed belonged solely to me now. Yet for the first time in what felt like forever, solitude didn't haunt me. Cradling a steaming cup of coffee, I stepped out onto the balcony. The dawn's rays caressed my skin, feeling more radiant than ever before. I took a careful sip. No poisonous undertones, no trepidation. Pure tranquility. 4 weeks later, I opened my computer. Throughout my career, I'd penned crime fiction. But this time, there was no need to invent anything. My reality surpassed any fiction. I began typing a Reddit submission. My husband and his sister attempted to poison me, but I unveiled their plot publicly. I shared everything, each moment, each feeling, not as someone broken, but as someone who prevailed. Beyond sharing my experience, I aim to convey something crucial. Trust your gut feelings. When something seems amiss, believe in yourself, and never back down. Within hours, my post gained massive traction. Comments and messages flooded in. It reads like a thriller come to life. You embody the strong heroine we need in reality. Turn this into a book, please. I grinned. Their words rang true. This would become my next book. Not for profit, but to show other women they could rise up. One crisp fall morning, I met Sarah at a quaint sidewalk cafe. "You seem transformed since I last saw you," she remarked, sipping her latte. I smiled. "That's because during our last meeting, I was battling for survival." Sarah laughed softly before turning serious. "What's next for you?" I breathed in the cool morning air deeply. To live. And to write. Because ultimately, I'd reclaimed what mattered most: my existence. I understand that those hearing this tale might wonder, how could a smart, self-reliant woman fall prey to such a scheme? Or perhaps, why didn't she escape earlier? The explanation is straightforward. When you deeply care for someone, you place your faith in them. When you construct a lifetime of memories with another person, accepting their betrayal seems impossible. And often, we resist confronting reality, because facing the truth can be more devastating than living in fear. But here's the wisdom I've gained, and I wish to pass it on. Your gut feelings never lie. When something doesn't seem right, acknowledge that sensation. Never dismiss the warning signs, and don't try to rationalize that you're being overly emotional. It took me too long to understand this. Don't repeat my mistake. Never surrender control of your destiny. Richard and Beatrice assumed I was merely a chess piece, a fragile soul who wouldn't resist. They misjudged me. Your life's direction should be determined by you alone. When someone attempts to control you, rise up. Defend yourself. Don't let love cloud your judgment. Love can be magnificent, but it transforms into a lethal weapon when manipulated. I loved Richard. I believed in him. But ultimately, I had to decide between love and self-preservation. Always prioritize yourself. Your resilience surpasses your expectations. I doubted my survival chances. I questioned my ability to overcome such an elaborate plot. Yet I prevailed. And if I accomplish this, you can too. Guard your well-being, whether in matters of romance, career, or any relationship. Learn to protect yourself. Had I not collected proof, had I not acted strategically, this story might have remained untold. And lastly, if my experience resonates with you, if you've faced similar circumstances, or if you seek more compelling true-life narratives, remember to comment if you've discovered your inner strength through adversity, like if you believe others should hear this story. Subscribe to stay updated on future stories, because there's much more to share. And always remember, never consume coffee without knowing its maker.